But first, I want to do an interview that certainly relates to Leaving Neverland and I guess tangentially to the Penn State stories and others that we've discussed. It is with a guy whose work I really respect, a YouTuber who became somewhat famous for his Honest Trailer series. His name is Andy Signor. And I wanted to talk to him about a new project he has coming up. So let's do that now. Andy Signor, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Andy, I was first familiar with you with your tremendous work on Honest Trailers, which were hilarious. Before we get into why I asked you on the podcast, tell us a little bit about your experience there.
Yeah, I was a YouTube creator that had pretty big success, and Honest Trailers was our biggest series. We got Emmy nominated several times. It was a series where we basically honest marketing for films in a humorous way, and it ended up taking off so well that we got Ryan Reynolds himself to do Deadpool in our Deadpool Honest Trailer. We had the Russo brothers who directed all the big Marvel movies. Apparently, we're trying to honest trailer proof their movie, Captain America, when they were making it. So it ended up doing really well, not only just obviously online, but in the industry. So that was on our channel, Screen Junkies, and I built several other big shows. I built a sword building show called Man at Arms that went to TV. Long story short, I had a lot of success in digital, and starting to translate into broadcast that I was very proud of.
And then what happened?
Well, basically overnight, actually it was longer than overnight, but what happened to me overnight was publicly, two people came forward saying, fans that I engaged with, flirted with online, one of which ballooned the story into accusations of sexual assault. She then, without any evidence, went on to tear me down. So even my former colleagues and friends were sort of were doubting me. The problem in my story was the one truth that I've completely taken accountability for, and I need to, is I was cheating on my wife, and I'm not proud of that. It's something that obviously was the real pain for my story, but she knew that I was not only doing that with her, but with others, and she sort of exploited that, I believe, to sort of out me as sort of a person that was not nice. But she took it to a step further by accusing me of attempted sexual assaults, and her specific charge really crippled me, and it prompted other people fans I had engaged with on Twitter as like, you're cute, or oh wow, just really awkward but normal flirtatious exchanges that if I were single I don't believe would have been a problem. But the problem was now it was all painted under this brush of this accuser who was accusing me of these awful, awful things. I went in to was planning to come in to tell my employer the truth. That weekend I was fired through a press release, and basically everything was destroyed overnight. And then went through a lawsuit, eventually settled, and I couldn't talk about this case for 2 years. But I'd been sitting on these text messages and emails that really showed them the truth about my accuser. Whether I should have held on to them or not, that's a debate that can be had later. But the reality is that legally I wasn't being advised to share them. And finally, once the lawsuit was settled and I was able to come forward, I released a video a couple weeks ago that really, I think, turned a lot of heads, made people think twice. And now, as the Me Too movement is I think some people are really coming around to realize we jumped to a lot of conclusions. I've thankfully been, a lot of people have been coming forward and apologizing for judging me the way they did, which has been grateful. But crazily enough, the mass media won't, publish it. They were so quick to tear me down, but now they don't want to have egg on their face and say, well, looks like there was more to this story, which is seemingly what the media does every time now. But that's the long story short of it.
So, and I don't know the details of your specific situation, but I mean, you seem like you're telling the truth to me based upon what I've seen online and in speaking to you. But just to be clear, so you did have an affair with this accuser, you just didn't assault her. Is that your story?
Yeah, I mean, we had a consensual affair, and I basically put together it's about a 20-minute statement video where I break it all down, and in that video, I show everything and her next to her statements, and I'm really able to prove that she's caught in lies. Her statement after everything came forward was, I knew some of this might come forward, but I still knew it was the right thing to do. This is my truth, and I'm sticking to it, and I'm moving forward. It was just a very frustrating reply that was not really a denial or anything. But when this all happened, yeah, she was accusing me of taking advantage of her, using her, trying to force myself on her, when the reality is, if you read the emails, the texts, and the nude photos she sent me, this was a completely consensual affair. She knew I was married. She was totally on board. She wanted access to the program. She was using me, and she was completely there was never anything that wasn't consensual between two adults. But she, I think, didn't want to seem like what's the word, just that she was using me for access. She ended up dating one of my employees right after me, and I think was just getting nervous about him finding out. So she painted it in a much more malicious brush, which then every interaction I ever made just destroyed me, is the bottom line of the story. And I couldn't, to this day, I'm still having trouble getting work, but thank God over the past few weeks I've been able to, shine light on my story. And like I said, people are fine when they see the evidence, and they, a lot of them were still a little doubting it when it all went down. Like, well, this doesn't make sense. There was reason it didn't make sense, and now with, thank God, the texts and emails that can sort of really break down the truth of the story, people are finally coming around and coming around to give me a second shot, which I'm grateful for. But what's really sad is a lot of people don't keep the text, and then women like this can just say whatever they want, and the guy is screwed moving forward, and that's really what's scary about this new movement we live in.
You said that she said this is her truth. It sounds like she's quoting Oprah Winfrey. That's one of Oprah Winfrey's favorite lines, which drives me crazy. There's only one truth. There's not the truth, not your truth. But you also mentioned that there was a settlement. Did she sue you, or what was the nature of the settlement? Why did you settle?
Yeah, I can't get into the details of the settlement and all that stuff. That's the one thing I'm not able to do. My case and complaint were public. It was against my former employer for terminating me.
Okay, so you didn't settle with her.
I was going after my employer. The problem with her is just no lawyer wanted to take it because she's a nobody with no money. And as much as I want to morally and ethically take that on, it's hard when it's just a regular civilian. And I obviously lost all my money when this went down. So,
right.
That's what happened. So focusing on the employer was really the goal for me and my family and my
okay. So you settled a case that you brought, not one that she brought, just to make it very
Correct.
clear
to
people.
The case I brought against my former employer, who also, mind you, got shut down last year. Which again, I shouldn't get in all the weeds of that stuff for legal reasons. But yeah, just to give you the backstory, it was a company I worked for, and we've settled. But my case against her, I've been able to take public that she wasn't an employee. That's the other thing. A lot of people were saying, he was sexually harassing his employees and et cetera. It wasn't the case. It was they were fans of mine who were engaging with me, and that's where things. That's where the conversation always goes to. Well, you shouldn't have been seeking relationships with your fans, and I have trouble following that. I think that's just sort of a common thing for rock stars and celebrities of sort of why a lot of people get fans. The thing that was wrong in my situation was I was married, and that isn't what I'm being. That's not what people are charging me with. It's the assaults charges. It's all these other bigger charges that people are coming at me for. When the reality is, I was a douchebag in that I shouldn't have done that to my family. That's the thing I'm really, have been working on the past years of why did I do that. I think, whole other conversation. I'll let you lead the thing, but that's obviously the trouble of what I did in my life and what I'm remorseful for. But what was frustrating is she was using that to sort of paint me as an abuser, and that when you're labeled that,
right.
It's hard to recover.
No, it's impossible. And as far as dating fans, I know in my own personal life, if I hadn't never dated a fan, I'm not sure I would have had much of a dating life. In fact, I wouldn't be married. But that's another story for another day. But as far as your situation and this nightmare that you went through, and let's presume for the sake of argument, everything you're telling us is true. What did you learn about the nature of the news media through all this?
I mean, they really want the salacious headlines, and they don't want to fact check. And they really just want that. I think it's changing slightly now because I think some of them are getting, taken to court. I think in the early, you got to remember also. I don't know because I don't know how familiar you were with my case, but I was literally the second person after Harvey Weinstein announced. It was like October 6th when Ashley Judd's article came out and really started the Me Too movement. I was literally the second person. So the media just they were just hungry for it. They wanted I wasn't even that famous. And that's what's so scary about these Me Too cases over the past years. There are below the line people who seem like, oh, they must be YouTube millionaires, and they're like, no, we were destroyed financially and just livelihoods gone because we couldn't defend ourselves. We couldn't afford to defend ourselves the way we should have been able to. So I see now that the media just really doesn't care. They just want the salacious headline. They don't want to check it. And now later, as I provide the evidence, I had a friend of mine who worked at a big publication, and he was all ready to report it. And then when he saw my statement, where my statement calls out the media, they didn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. He's like, sorry, we can't publish this. And no major media outlet will publish it. Only big, online blogs and podcasts and YouTube channels were the only ones that were able to spread the news, which thankfully they did, and it went viral that way. But it's just really scary to see what the media wants to say and doesn't want to say.
Well, it's all about their own self-interest, and they don't want to be made to look bad. They don't want to be made to look like they rushed to judgment. And then they also, they can always just say, well, it's old news now. It was news back then, but of course, the inherent disadvantage that someone has in defending themselves is that in order to defend yourself against an accusation like this, you need a lot of time. You can make an accusation in 2 sentences in a tweet. You can't respond in a tweet. You have to have, as you said, text messages and context, and you need to explain a whole lot of things. And especially when you're not a big celebrity, you don't have access to a platform to be able to do that to a large number of people. And so, and then you get involved in a lawsuit, and you're effectively, you're censored for a couple of years. And by the time you can get your story out, it's too old. It's too late. It's too old news. The damage has been done. So a person like yourself is at an incredible disadvantage, even more so than a celebrity who at least might have some money and cachet to do a major media interview or what have you. So I totally understand where you're coming from. And part of the reason why I asked you on the podcast is that you're actually trying to do something about this, what you're calling cancel culture, where you feel like you were canceled, and you are now trying to detail the stories of other people who have been unfairly canceled by both the Me Too movement and I guess in general this notion that we have that as soon as we get a figment of any story that upsets us, outrages us, our initial reaction, especially on Twitter, is to cancel the person, and this is what you're calling cancel culture. So tell us about what you're trying to do there.
Yeah, I absolutely was canceled overnight, and I think that you said it right. This is sort of a new fad, I think, and especially on social media where people they want, they just want to feel good and like a seemingly positive movement, but they don't understand that they're destroying not only someone's life, but the family, everything around them. And so as this happened to me, and I finally was able to stand back up and regain some of my celebritydom, thankfully, over the past couple of weeks, I've been lucky enough to earn a spotlight back. And as I did that, I realized, there were so many people that were reaching out to me, hundreds of them, that had been through similar situations. And I took them all with a grain of salt because you do want to make sure you hear both sides of the story. But as I sort of looked into a few of the people that were reaching out, it was just clear to me that so many people have been wronged and just judged and kicked out to the curb. And then as they sort of get the opportunity to sort of defend themselves, like you said, the media has moved on, no one cares, there's no platform for them. They're all just sort of, now silent. So many people that just want to be heard, that I feel like have the right to be heard and don't have the platform to do it. And that's when the idea sort of spurred to me of a series I'm doing called Hugging the Cactus. And it was a term actually I heard Mel Gibson coined it when he was with Robert Downey Jr. And Robert Downey Jr. was sort of at his lowest, alcoholism, et cetera. And now he's obviously Mr. Everybody loves him and Iron Man, and really I think has changed for the better. When he was at his lowest point, Mel Gibson took him in and said, you gotta embrace the ugly in you. If you hug it and really do it, at some point you'll learn from this and you'll be a better person because of it. And he called it Hugging the Cactus. And it really spoke with me during sort of my period of being canceled. And so the show is that it's sort of finding other people who went wronged or not, or just pushed out, canceled, etc. People who have been through this experience and just really want their voice heard and need a platform to be heard. And I have 2 specific stories. I just dropped a trailer. If you look it up on Kickstarter, Hugging the Cactus, or you go to uncancel.com with 1 L, uncancel, and then ed.com. You can learn more about this. But I have two amazing stories so far, and so many more coming. But one she's a politician named Caitlin Ford, politician in Canada, and she was having these academic conversations with a friend of hers years ago that were completely taken out of context and misshared, and painted her as a white supremacist supporter, which then immediately went to, well, she is a white supremacist. And overnight, this wonderful, smart mother of two, who's not at all anywhere near that, was painted that way, and her political and just all career was destroyed. She couldn't do any of the international human rights she was working on, and she couldn't support her kids. And it was heartbreaking, the story. And if you watch the trailer, I think her story specifically speaks to a lot of people. But then on the other side of the coin, there's a filmmaker named Dale Wheatley who made a film called Don's Plum back in 1996. And Leonardo DiCaprio, with all his power, canceled him. He was a rising star at the time and friends with Dale, as Tobey Maguire, who eventually became Spider-Man, was also in the film. And this was right at the cusp of their sort of fame. While they were out there, chasing skirts, they didn't want the movie to come out. Toby himself actually was Machiavellian and how he sort of pitted Dale against Leo, and it's just this amazingly salacious but crazy story. But really, this sort of really turn of friends, and beyond that, Leo to this day, 2 decades later, has now just destroyed Dale's career, and the man can never work again when he did nothing wrong. He just made a film and then suddenly tried to get the film released, and now Leo painted him as a opportunist who was just trying to use his name at the time and sullied him. Both of these stories are immensely heartbreaking for me, and you just realize there's so many more to tell. And so the opportunity of the show is really to have these conversations and use the spotlight on McCruing again to help, just give people the opportunity to say their piece, be able to say it, and hopefully get some support and love. Because right now, I feel like as a society, we're so polarizing, we're so divisive right now and attacking everybody that it's just not good. It's not good for us. We need to be able to support people and extend a hand when they're down. Even if they, did something wrong, people should have the chance to right that wrong, to get forgiveness, to work on themselves. And social media doesn't believe that right now. So I want to push against that sort of cancel culture idea and attempt to cancel that cancel culture and really sort of put the spotlight on these stories so people can see how often it's happening and the damage it does to people, just emotionally, financially. It's really brutal.
Andy, let me ask you about some of the more high-profile situations that are related to the Me Too movement, where people have either been canceled or have attempted to be canceled by the media or elements of the news media. And on this particular podcast, we have focused on two situations in particular. Most recently, over the last several months, in light of the HBO documentary, or movie as I refer to it, fantasy film really, Leaving Neverland, accusing Michael Jackson of sexual abuse, brutal sexual abuse against two men, Wade Robson and James Safechuck, who now suddenly, many years later, have salacious stories that are detailed by the director of the movie, Dan Reed. Where do you stand on Michael Jackson's attempted canceling, which apparently has not gone nearly as well as the filmmakers would have hoped or anticipated?
Yeah, I think that story to me, that film you call it frustrates me the most, just because I agree with you. I've seen some of your pieces on this, and I'm with you because and full disclosure, I've spoken to and been friendly with Taj, who's I know a defender of this too. And I'm completely on his side. I think what's really unfair about that film and what's happening to Michael, one, obviously the right that he can't defend himself. It's really disgusting to me that we're just sort of kicking him while he's down. But two, that film is just a complete hit job without any side of the other story. And I'm very frustrated by those two people, those two individuals. I think it's incredibly unfair of that filmmaker. He's saying, well, this is their story, yada, 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 but their story is destroying a man and his livelihood, his career, and his children, and all this stuff. That's just not okay with me. It doesn't sit well with me. Speaking directly about the film, I think the film is unfair, and I think Michael should have the right to have his music. I mean, I'm sad. His episode of The Simpsons is one of my favorites that my kids and I love to watch, and that episode has now been canceled. Weird Al Yankovic, who's an idol of mine, his two songs, Michael Jackson parodies, were not on tour this season when I took my kids to finally see him live, and we were super bummed. And this idea now that this film by these two people who perjured themselves and are the most unreliable witnesses in the world but now everyone's just like, see, yeah, everything must have been true. It really breaks my heart. I think people had the chance to prove that, over Michael's life. They always weren't able to. I don't believe there's any evidence or anything that says Michael did any of the atrocious things they're saying. It's all hearsay. I do believe Michael had a really tough upbringing, and it's really hard to sort of put myself in the shoes of what was he doing. I do think, Michael did some inappropriate things. Like, I don't like that he was sleeping in the beds with children, which he admitted on that show, but that doesn't mean I think he was molesting them. There's a lot of stuff I've read where he was just asexual, and he just wanted that childlike innocence with these kids. And I would never allow him to do that with my children, I'll be honest, I don't believe he was doing it maliciously. And even beyond all that, I believe you have to separate art from the artist, and us canceling the music and trying to ruin his legacy, and that affects his children and his family. It's just not right. I'm not a fan of what they're doing to him, and I still proudly play my Michael Jackson music with my kids, and I will forever celebrate him and his legendary status, because I believe what's happening there was immensely unfair.
And for the record, you mentioned Taj Jackson, who is the nephew of Michael Jackson, who has appeared on this podcast previously. I don't know if you're a sports fan or not, but I've devoted about 7 years to the whole Penn State Joe Paterno, Jerry Sandusky case. And regardless of what you make of the case, there is absolutely no possible way to logically support the idea that Joe Paterno, who, much like Michael Jackson, is now deceased, should be canceled or erased from the history of college football, which, this being the 150th anniversary of college football, there's a lot of retrospectives, and already Joe Paterno is effectively being canceled. He's the all-time winningest coach in the history of college football, and he barely ever gets mentioned, and sometimes gets totally erased for what I strongly believe and know more about than probably anybody in the world, including Jerry Sandusky, was not a situation where he was in any way, shape, or form enabling child sex abuse. What you have any opinions on that particular story?
No, to be honest, that's one that was before. I really wanted to focus on that. I'm not a college football fan. I read the headlines, and I don't want to chime in because I maybe don't know the full story of that. But I'm happy to send me some links. I'd love to research and hear some of the
It'll blow.
Done, but I don't,
It'll blow your mind. I can assure you, Andy, it will blow your mind, because when this is all said and done, I believe, hopefully one day, maybe soon, the history of this entire cancellation movement, the Salem witch trialification of our media, this will be the seminal moment. This will be the moment that everyone lost their minds forever. And I'll be happy to educate you on that. Are there any other high-profile situations that stick out in your mind? I happen to have gotten to know Matt Lauer a little bit, having appeared on with him 3 times on the Today Show in rather major interviews, and I had very combative interviews with him, did not agree with him on most things. He did not do me any favors, but I got to know him a little bit, and I know people close to him, and I believe he was totally railroaded for political purposes, effectively a sacrificial lamb for the Me Too movement, because NBC News needed a scalp because they had killed the Ronan Farrow Harvey Weinstein story, and they also wanted to get rid of a big contract. Any opinions on him or anybody else that also got canceled in the post Harvey Weinstein Me Too era?
I mean, I paid more attention to Matt Lauer's story because that was happening right after me, and clearly anybody was going down. I don't know the facts. I do agree with you, though, that there seem to be a lot of problems at NBC beyond just, allegedly him. At the same time, I don't know. It's like, in my case, as I look at these stories, it's like, I don't think I'm 100% innocent. That the frustration is like, yeah, I cheated on my wife, and I believe he may have too. And that rubs people the wrong way. Should that have, publicly tarred and feathered him the way we did? No, maybe not. I think that's fair. But does he deserve to, look himself hard in the mirror and make some changes in his life? Maybe. And I think that's what's so hard about this whole movement and some of these stories. Because it's like, I don't want to come out and say yes or no on everybody. I think everybody should have the right to defend themselves, and he didn't. And he hasn't had the opportunity. We just completely torched him. So for that sake, I don't like it, because I want to know, well, what's your side of the story? That's important. And in the case with him, though, it's like, he has a lot of money. So I feel a little less worried about him because You know, he and his wife have 10 mansions. They can go take that time and pause. You know, like John Lasseter was one that was really fascinating to me, the head of Pixar. And he's another one that's like, did it really affect him? I don't think it did. Did he do some things that made women feel uncomfortable? Sounds like he did. He sounds like he admitted and apologized for that. Should he have never worked again? Absolutely not. The dude's a legend who's made stories that are going to stand the test of time. And it sounds like he already got a job. So it's tough. Like some of these cases, it's case by case. The ones that really affect me more are the ones that it's like, I think Matt Lauer is going to get an opportunity to work again. And I think, you know, he's got enough money, and I think if he does it right and does what I think, you know, people can do through proper PR, he will. Like Louis C.K. is probably the biggest one that's connected to me, and I'm really tied into and fascinated by. I assume you're familiar with his story, yes?
You got garbled there, so I wasn't even sure who you mentioned.
The Louis C.K., the comedian?
Oh, yeah, Louis C.K., sure.
Yeah, Louis C.K. was the one that I was paying close attention. I think it's you know, that one's really fascinating to me because he is like a comedian that has just built his reputation on being honest and raw. Mm-hmm. And when that happened, I think a lot of people wanted to hear him say what happened. Like they were waiting for him to like make his special and come forward and just come clean and do a sort of take us to church, if you will, like his comedy set. And instead he went out and sort of did little tests. And I don't know if he's prepping a thing or not, but I really wish he would just come out and just say it because I think people would embrace him again. In his story specifically, it's complicated because from everything I've read and people close to it I've heard, he would ask for permission before he exposed himself and did what he wanted to do. And that's, you know, that makes it a little bit more complicated, you know? And even Sarah Silverman, the comedian, came forward and was like, yeah, I said yes. I wanted to watch him do that. And so it's like it's a weird blurred line we live in now of like, right. Well, is that assault? I don't know, you know? And so my point is like, there are so many of these where there's so many, it's hard to just chop it up to like yes or no or whatever. Do I think he was also railroaded? Yes. Do I think his career will be destroyed though? No. So as we navigate Me Too, I think there's a little bit of, you know, there's some other people out there that I think, a smaller tier that you wouldn't even know, who have been wronged and then completely are torched because the way Google rankings work, you know, people can't get jobs because, you know, a bunch of really, the trades write about some editor of a small media company that you wouldn't know. But his name now is nothing's ever going to get above that listing. And so every time that person goes and gets a job, he's screwed. No. But Matt Lauer, I mean, if he wanted to make a big chunk of money to do some sort of return, I think he could. So my point is it's complicated. The ones I connect to and really feel for are the ones that are a lot lower tiered that we're not talking about, that no one even knows, and that they can't, you know, pay for their kids right now. That's scary because, you know, do I think Matt Lauer made some mistakes? He probably did. Did he deserve to be as blown up out of proportion as it was? No. Does that make sense?
No, sure. I mean, for the record, I believe that Matt Lauer had an affair on his wife with a colleague at the Olympics, which he was supposed to disclose and never did because he was Matt freaking Lauer and never had to in the past. And NBC decided to suddenly enforce a rule they had never enforced before because they wanted to get rid of him. That's what happened.
Exactly. Like the fact that NBC totally knew, and you're absolutely right, that's the problem with that case. And they allowed him to do it. And then suddenly, when the movement came to their door, oh, no, we weren't allowing that. And then suddenly, Matt Lauer gets the hell out. You're absolutely right. That's a huge problem that people don't talk about in that case.
All right. Well, Andy, thanks so much for joining us. Let people know how they can find out more and support what you're doing with this Hugging the Cactus project.
Yeah, they can look me up on Kickstarter, or you can go to Uncanceled. That's with one L. There's on the word uncanceled.com. Or you can look me up, Andy Signore, Signore, social media and YouTube. I have a channel called Popcorn Planet where I really link to that Kickstarter all week. But I got a week left, and if anybody has a story they want to share or are offering, you know, can offer to help sponsor or support this, we're like 75% funded. I'm trying to reach a $10,000 goal, which I think we'll be able to do by the end of the week, but I can't do it without supporters. So anybody out there who agrees with this cancel culture needing to be canceled and wants to sort of share more of these stories, I'd be grateful for support. And thank you so much, John, for letting me come on and spread the word.
No problem. And as far as sharing stories, I got about 4 or 5 I could share with you that will blow your mind.
Yeah, let's talk off air, and I'd love to hear, because I'm currently prepping more stories that need to be out there, and I think it sounds like we definitely could share some.
All right. Thanks, Andy. You take care. Good luck.
Thanks, John. Have a great day.
That's Andy Signore. Thanks so much for his time. So that leads us into the latest on Leaving Neverland, and There have been some developments. To those who have followed the story, none of these are shocking, but it's interesting what sometimes gets the major media's attention. A couple of weeks ago now, there was the release via an online documentary of Wade Robson's video testimony, which was done just before he did his interviews with Dan Reed for the film, and that's important. And to me, the most significant thing about, from a substantive standpoint, from a factual basis, of what we got from the video clips of that deposition, and by the way, I have no idea how the deposition got leaked. I'm assuming it had some connection to the Jackson estate. I'm not sure I would have done it the way that they did it, but I wasn't consulted. But it got out there, and that's good. And it got some media attention because, I've already referenced, Geraldo Rivera decided to use it as his cover to come out and call Robeson and Safechuck liars on Fox News Channel, which I'll get to shortly. But the substantive revelation here, which is important, it sounds like a small thing, but it's not, is that Robeson is telling a completely different story in his deposition under oath about his reaction to Michael Jackson's death than he did in the movie. And why is that important? Well, it's important, one, because any contradiction in your story over such a short period of time should immediately raise alarm bells, right? I mean, your story should be consistent, especially over something as big as that. I mean, this is a guy who you're saying abused you for 7 years. You were on record being his biggest fan. You testified at this 2005 trial. Your entire persona was about Michael, who begged for tickets for your whole family to go to the funeral. You go to the funeral. You write all sorts of very wonderfully praising things about Michael Jackson. I mean, over the top. And you are asked in your deposition, did you go to the funeral and did you cry? And Robeson claims to not remember. He's not sure. He might have. If he did, it wasn't that big of a deal. That's the whole impression that you get. And then in the movie, which he did the interview for just 2 months later, it's a totally different story. He's clearly there. He's sobbing. But it's all part of the trauma of having gone through this horrific abuse and then seeing Michael Jackson die, and he's experiencing confusion and all that. Now, I understand more than anybody that alleged accusers get an enormous amount of slack on how they're allowed to behave in any kind of situation. I mean, there's almost no behavior. None. Can't be rationalized to fit if people want to believe that they were abused. But in this particular context, here's why this is important. This is important, one, because of the timing and how dramatically different the story is, but also this is, I think, the smoking gun of the influence of the director of the film, Dan Reed. Because it is clear that the reason why the story changes is that Dan Reed has decided this is the narrative he wants. See, Wade Robson in the deposition, before Dan Reed gets involved, thinks that him crying at Michael Jackson's funeral is a bad thing for his case, because he's thinking logically. He's not a moron. He knows that this is damaging. When Dan Reed gets a hold of this, he says, no, and this is me making an educated guess. He's saying, no, we want you to be as upset as possible, because first of all, the record's pretty clear you were there, so let's own this, and let's turn into the curve, and let's turn into the trauma that you experienced here. And I am of the very firm belief that if the lawsuit allows the Jackson estate to get the outtakes of the interviews that Dan Reed did with Wade Robson and James Safechuck, that we're going to see that what I'm saying is 100% true. That these guys were coached, that this was done as a feature film, not a documentary. That's why it took 3 days, that there were multiple takes of the same answer. And that this was done in a way where literally Dan Reed was the director, as opposed to simply the guy telling the story or allowing Safechuck and Robson to tell their stories. He's directing the story, because that's the only logical way to explain how Robson's story changes so dramatically in just 2 months, so far away from the fact. And there are other things in the deposition that are also very damaging, and Wade Robson just doesn't come across as credible. It appears to the average person that he knows he's lying, and he's embarrassed about it as he's lying in his deposition. But that's a matter of someone's subjective impression of it. That's not necessarily a factual assessment that can be made. As far as Geraldo Rivera's reaction and Fox News Channel airing that, the way I perceived that was Geraldo has always believed that this was bullcrap, or suspected that it was bullcrap. He's been a fan of Michael Jackson's for a very long time. He's been a sometime defender of Michael Jackson, and he was just looking for an excuse. He was looking for political cover. And the deposition was enough to give him political cover to go out on Fox News Channel and say this is all BS. Unfortunately, that didn't go very far. It was a positive step, and it might give some other people some theoretical cover, but partially because of Geraldo's history, and partially, maybe more so, because of Fox News Channel's sellout to Donald Trump. Fox News Channel has zero cachet or influence now in the rest of the news media. So because Geraldo Rivera says something on Fox News Channel, as dramatic as it was, it doesn't have any impact on how the rest of the news media is going to react. And the rest of the news media already has their narrative. They're not going to change that narrative unless it's in their best interest to do so. And this is the most frustrating element of this entire issue, whether it's Michael Jackson or the Penn State situation or others. You can make an allegation like this in literally a sentence or two. To be able to deconstruct that allegation, it takes a lot of time. I mean, literally, even me just explaining it often takes minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, sometimes longer than that. You don't have that kind of time in this day and age, especially in the media. We're living in a Twitter world. If it can't fit in a tweet, it doesn't count. Which is why the James Safechuck train station story, where the train station didn't exist when he said he was abused by Michael Jackson at Neverland, why that's so important. Even though it's just a tiny data point, and frankly, it didn't impact me personally all that much because I already had come to the conclusion he was lying, but it's an effective weapon because that you can fit in a tweet. And it's pathetic and it's sad, but that's the world we live in. And fighting now from behind with no leverage when the story is now old is almost impossible, especially on a politically correct story that involves child sex abuse, because the media doesn't want to hear it. They don't want to admit they were wrong. They don't want to admit they rushed to judgment. It's not what gets reported anymore. It's what gets repeated. And this is never going to get repeated. And even the Robson deposition, it's too nuanced and complicated and takes too long to explain why it's important for it to have a massive public impact. I mean, we're really at the point now where unless you get Wade Robson or James Safechuck saying, I lied, I made this up, or their moms saying, I lied, I made this up, or Oprah Winfrey saying, I got duped, I'm sorry, short of that, nothing is going to have a massive impact. Does every little bit help? Sure. But you're really only helping keep the fan base intact. And frankly, that based upon my experience for Michael Jackson is intact as it could possibly ever be. They've been amazing. I've been astonished by their reaction to all this, and it's been very substantive almost in every case. And so that's really not a major problem. Again, I'm not suggesting that this doesn't have value, but in the bigger picture, I don't think it changes fundamentally anything. And changing anything fundamentally is exceedingly difficult, if not impossible, under the circumstances of the nature of the modern news media and the subject of child sex abuse. Speaking of that, I have referenced that in my own personal hell, which has been the last 7 or 8 years of me investigating the Penn State Joe Paterno, Jerry Sandusky story in a way that no one else was willing or able to do, I have been hopeful that coming up very shortly, I would get at least some semblance of vindication. Now, my expectations, having lived through this hell for the last 7 or 8 years, are incredibly small, very low. But I have reason to believe that in September, very well-respected author, people who have heard this before are probably aware of whom I'm speaking, who is going to write or has written a chapter about this particular case. Now, they're taking a much broader view based upon my conversations with this author. They're not going to specifically focus or defend necessarily Jerry Sandusky, as I ended up doing after several years of investigation and presuming Sandusky was guilty at first and then becoming totally convinced of his innocence many years later after interviewing him twice in prison and reinvestigating the entire case. So that is going to happen. And in fact, we currently have an interview with that author scheduled for just before the release of the book. Everything in my life is incredibly frustrating, and nothing ever goes exactly as planned. The author told me I would have the book by now, and I don't have the book by now. And so, you know, every day I'm going out to the mailbox going, okay, is this finally going to be the day when I can say to somebody, hey, so-and-so says I'm right about this, because he says I'm positively referenced, my work is, in this particular chapter. But unfortunately, I have not yet received the book. So I don't know to what degree this author has been willing or able to go. The fact that he's already offered to do an interview with me gives me some confidence, because he's a very smart guy. And if he did a really bad job with this, I don't think he would agree to do an interview with me for this particular podcast. But unfortunately, I don't have as much information to share with you as I would like. There is another development, though, and this is, I think the Michael Jackson fans will particularly appreciate the frustrating nature of this development. And I don't want to get too much into it because the dust hasn't totally settled yet, but the entire Jerry Sandusky case really comes down to one accuser. It was victim number one. His name is Aaron Fisher. And I had wrongly presumed that Aaron Fisher was totally credible. That was one of the biggest mistakes I made in this entire investigation. I didn't even focus on him because he had written a book. He had done a major TV interview. He had come forward before anybody else did. And it just seemed to me, okay, he has to be credible, because I was very naive and uneducated, frankly, at the time about what was capable in these kinds of stories. Well, incredibly long story short, I now know that Aaron's not telling the truth, and I have interviews with 13 people very close to him in various forms who know that Aaron Fisher was not abused by Jerry Sandusky. And it's really remarkable how almost universally, I'm talking about very close people, including relatives by marriage, close relatives by marriage to Aaron Fisher, who do not believe this, and people who knew him very well at the time, friends of his at the time of the alleged abuse. And so I have, Aaron Fisher and I have quite a history. Aaron has threatened me with death. He's threatened to run me over with his truck. He has refused to take a lie detector test that I offered to pay for after his mother had accepted the offer. He will not speak to me. I've been to his house. I would love nothing more than for Aaron Fisher to prove to me that he's a credible accuser of Jerry Sandusky, because then I could be done with this whole thing. But I don't believe that will ever happen, because he's not. And Aaron Fisher is a bad person. And there's more evidence that Aaron Fisher is a bad person that has just come out on the Facebook page of his wife. Although I'm not sure, she may or may not still be his wife at this point. But his wife, Mallory, has posted on Facebook, and these posts were sent to me, that Aaron Fisher raped her and that Aaron Fisher abused her physically. And now the frustration here is, in the real world, a child sex abuse victim does not go around raping their wife. Does not physically abuse their wife. Now, the CSA terrorists, and many of them, that's who these people are. They're terrorists who will believe anything. Will tell you that that's because they were abused, because they were sexually abused as children. That's why they're abusing somebody else. And I'm sure that there are examples of that happening. Like there's examples of everything happening in the world. But based upon my research, there is no evidence whatsoever that would suggest that a child sex abuse victim is more likely to abuse a spouse, or that would be the reason why that they would abuse their spouse. I fully realize that in this case, there is, much like Michael Jackson, there's no game changer. But this is particularly interesting given the history of Aaron Fisher, and I am efforting having a conversation with his wife. I guess she's still his wife, although I'm not optimistic based upon past history that I'll be able to pull that off, but I found that was worthy of at least mention. So I'll keep you in the loop on what's going on with that book, and hopefully by the next edition of the World According to Zig podcast, I'll know more.